Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Oleh and Ukraine Media Center Inform continues its operation. Today is day 383 of the full-scale invasion of Russian aggressor of our homeland, and now we will be talking about the situation in Kharkiv. Joining us online is the military governor of Kharkiv region, Oleh Syniehubov. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Oleh. The latest massive strike inflicted by the Russians, it happened on the 9th of March. We know that it did not end without consequences for Kharkiv region. What are such consequences? What was mitigated already? Well, really the latest missile strike of Kharkiv and Kharkiv region was quite serious. It inflicted serious damage on our energy infrastructure, and our energy technicians within 2 days were working on restoration and mitigation of the damage we had. Now the city of Kharkiv is 100% supplied with the electric power, as well as the most communities of the region. Most likely we will have to implement the schedules of rolling power shutdowns soon, because the capacity we're having at this moment, it's still not enough to cover the needs of all the consumers and businesses and industry. I don't exclude any possibility of any emergency shutdowns, because the situation so far is at the level of being stabilized. So talking about the public transport, did you manage to relaunch its operation already? Not yet. The electric transport doesn't work in the city. The city government makes everything they can to arrange this. Talking about the bombardments that Russians inflict maybe on the daily basis in Kharkiv region, what is the situation in the settlements along the borderline? Yeah, really there are bombardments in the settlements along the borderline on the daily basis. Kyiv district, Kharkiv district, Vovchansky direction, they're being shelled right now while we are talking with you, and Kupiansk, where the front line is going along, is shelled in the same manner. The settlement Pokryivka suffers mostly. That's the direction of Kremina, and enemy inflicts constant strikes on the town of Kupiansk itself, and the enemy keeps striking those cities with all the types of heavy weapons, mortars, artillery, tanks, all calibers. Mr. Oleh, as to the recovery of those settlements where the situation is more or less stable, so to say, are those works already initiated? What is the phase of those works in Izum, Balakleya, and other towns and villages? We try to reestablish the power supply in the deoccupied territories. We got 180,000 consumers reconnected, and we keep reestablishing power supply for 200-300 consumers on a daily basis. Currently the situation is complicated by dense mining of those territories, and we coordinate our actions with the State Emergency Service to proceed to broad-scale demining, to have those people who were left without electric power, to get them reconnected to the electric power supply. Well, today we were talking a lot about demining in our studio, and we were talking about demining of Mykolaiv and Kherson regions. How is the situation with demining in Kharkiv region? Are the works underway, and what is still ahead? There is information that Kharkiv region is where our international partners get involved in these processes. Can you give us a little bit more detail about that? Well, really, Kharkiv region is recognized as one of the most densely mined, and I will give you just one example. For example, today in Syniehubov, it's Izum district, there is a fact of explosion of a civilian aged, a man aged 40 got injured by a mine of the petal type, and in that very same settlement there was a case when the unit of the State Emergency Service arrived to study the yard of a person. They found about 70 those petal mines around the yard of only one house, which witnesses the very dense mining of those territories. So for the time being, the weather conditions doesn't allow us to perform any broad-scale demining. However, we have to be ready to that, and we are in coordination with the units of State Emergency Service of Kyiv region to reinforce those units that already operate in our region. We support the Office of President's negotiations with international organizations to demine our agrarian lands. It's about, well, actually more than 500,000 hectares are mined, and now we may talk about 250,000 hectares, and the rest 250 we will proceed to their demining in view of the development of the war situation. They are mostly those concentrated along the borderline. We have questions on the floor. Good afternoon, Irina Mamchur, Ukrinform. I have a couple of questions. Were we able to extract the bodies of all those perished from the administration that was bombarded by Russians from the building of administration that was bombarded by Russian in February? Well, there are constant shellings in that territory, so the works are complicated. What is left of that building, there is rubble, and it's unfortunately not always possible to work there. We know that when it happened, the enemy, after the missile strike that destroyed the building of administration, the enemy kept shelling the material of the State Emergency Service units that were working on site, and those bombardments are repeated on a constant basis to perform the clearing of the rubble, of the debris. We need some heavy material. Do we know how many bodies are still under the debris? According to the information we have, there are still 2 bodies remaining. Thank you. And another question, if I'm allowed, you mentioned about the Kupiansk area where the active warfare is still on. Can you give us more detail whether the Russians want to switch to counteroffensive in that area? Do we have any territorial losses, if this information may be disclosed? Yes, it may be disclosed. There are 29 settlements under temporary occupation. That figure does not change. There are 3 settlements that we see as gray zone, where the battles are still active. The Linkivka that I mentioned. However, our warriors are at their positions and they don't concede them. The enemy really tries to attack with the purpose of identifying weak links in our defense, and maybe this is how they prepare more heavy offensive in those directions. However, they cannot develop their success so far, so they withdraw to the positions they occupied earlier. And another question, if I may, as to the mandatory evacuation of the children from some communities of the region, from those settlements near the front lines. So how is this mandatory evacuation going on? There's information in Telegram channels that the parents of the families, they refuse to do evacuation, and how many kids are still remaining in those dangerous territories. Well, you know, within the last week we evacuated more than 300 people from different settlements that are under constant fire. We continue our work on the mandatory evacuation. We try to explain people all the safety and security issues, the security of their families, and regarding the kids, we continue working on that matter, and our task is to evacuate not only children but also their families, the whole families from those territories. So we evacuated 2 people today from under fire from Syniehubov that I already mentioned today. Thank you very much for this information. Thank you for joining our broadcast, dear colleagues. I'm reminding you, joining us was military governor of Kharkiv region, Oleh Syniehubov. Right now our team is working on the schedule of briefings for tomorrow, so follow our announcements, bear with us, work together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine.